Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leftridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
Word Travels by Derek Leftridge. Haunted houses are a great source of myths as part of towns or as legends in neighborhoods to entertain individuals or as a cautionary tale for children. That said, the lore of the home at 2146 Davins is one that many think they know, but only one person who experienced it firsthand, Estelle Gran, lived through an evening in the house. Estelle lived across the street in a two-family flat from the home that was thought to be haunted. 9 years ago, Estelle had visited the home a couple of times to check on the older woman who lived in the home because she was bedridden. The woman, known as Mrs. Chance, lived in the home for over 63 years, and after her children left for their own lives and her husband passed away, she started to get weak and sick. This eventually led to her becoming bedridden, and her family would help her when they could, but also asked Estelle to help from time to time. Estelle was surprised and a little creeped out when she first visited Mrs. Chance to see that her home was set up with an elaborate fetching system, so to speak. The system was set up so that bedridden Mrs. Chance could get mail, meds, and groceries delivered from her front door to her within the house. Specifically, the mail moved from out of the mailbox by a slot in the back portion of the mailbox into a container on the living room floor. Mrs. Chance presses a button on an elaborate remote system by her bed, causing the container to sprout wheels from the sides and roll across the floor to the bedside. And then the container extends automatically up so Mrs. Chance can reach the mail. This was a surprise to Estelle, but the creep factor kicked in when she went to the kitchen and saw the automated robotic seating and feeding system in the home. The first time she walked into the kitchen, she was grabbed by the automated system and offered a choice of lunch to eat. Estelle squeals in surprise, and Mrs. Chance announces, "Mira, that is not me, that is my friend, and she is not hungry." The automated arm let go of Estelle, pulled away, and turned to preparing food. Estelle inquires, "This is an impressive system. How did you get something like that?" Mrs. Chance replies, "My son is an engineer and got a grant to create that system for elderly people at his company." There was an additional system in the home that collected packages that were delivered, and the bed Mrs. Chance lay in was able to raise her to a seated position and get from the bed to her automated wheelchair. Knowing all this, Estelle always wondered what happened to this system after Mrs. Chance passed away. The home had not been lived in for over a year now, and Mrs. Chance's family, that still owned it, had not put it on the market to be sold. A couple of weeks ago, Estelle saw a car parked less than a block away, and those inside seemed to be looking at the home, and every few hours the car would drive away. Then, 5 minutes later, another would take its place. This has been happening 5 times a day, every day. Doing her unofficial surveillance, Estelle notices there is a 45-minute window each day around 11:45 a.m. where no car is on the street watching the home. She decides to take advantage of this time and walk over to the house, sneak around the back, and get into the house from the back door, then take a look inside for herself and her own curiosity. Quickly making her walk, Estelle gets a few feet from the back door and hears someone say behind her, "Oh, Estelle, is that you?" Noticeably startled, Estelle looks quickly to the left, in the direction of the voice, and sees Laura, the neighbor. "Oh, hi, Laura. I was walking by and heard a cat crying and was going to check to see if I could locate it." "Oh, no. Well, let me know if you need any help." Estelle replies, "Oh, yes, but not sure it is necessary. Thank you." Laura walks towards the back porch and walks through the porch to the house. Estelle acts as if she is looking for the cat in the overgrown bushes around the back entrance until Laura goes into her home. Estelle then tries the handle to the back door, and surprisingly it is unlocked, and Estelle opens it, and she steps inside. Once inside, Estelle looks around the back porch area using the light from the cracked open back door. She begins to make her way toward the kitchen area. She remembers being about 5 feet straight ahead. Suddenly, the back door closes loudly behind her. As she turns around and rushes to the door, she realizes it's locked. Or maybe just stuck, but she's not able to get it open. Panicked, Estelle looks towards the kitchen to possibly make her way to the front door and out of this house. However, as she gets halfway into the kitchen, she stops because she hears a creaking sound ahead. Holding her breath and listening even harder, she realizes it is the mailbox and mail being delivered to it. Her first thought is, why would mail be getting delivered to an abandoned home? And secondly, the best way to get out of this house. Before Estelle could even begin another thought, she hears what sounds like a whirring noise, and the container that sits below the mailbox on the living room floor comes out of the shadows from the living room area. The container comes closer and closer and stops before entering the kitchen. The basement door begins to open, and the container rolls towards the threshold of the basement door and begins to roll down the basement steps, one at a time. Shocked and curious, Estelle cautiously walks over to the open basement door and looks down the stairs as the container rolls off the last step and begins to roll onto the basement floor. Being guided by more curiosity than fear, Estelle begins to descend the basement stairs. Once down the stairs into the basement, Estelle hears the whirring again of the container before seeing it, heading to the eastmost part of the room. The container tips up and the letter falls out right in front of what looks like a hole in the wall. Slowly walking towards the wall, Estelle stops as a hand comes out of the hole and grabs the letter. The container turns and rolls past her and begins to go back up the stairs. Estelle walks closer to the hole, bends down to possibly look into it, but stops short and shakily says, "Hello? Is someone in there?" A voice from the hole says, "Yes, we are in here, actually, over here. Please help us. Please help." Estelle gasps and leans closer to the hole in the wall, and before she can speak, she feels a tap on her right shoulder. She quickly turns around and falls to the basement floor from being hit by something on the head. Coming out of the blackness, Estelle groans and begins to focus and realizes she is seated on the basement floor, and in front of her sits a shadowy figure in a folding chair. Blinking and struggling through the pain in the back of her head, she says, Who are you? What's going on?" From behind her in the distance, a voice says, "No, don't talk to him. Get out." The figure in the chair interrupts and yells, "Shut up." Estelle jumps, and the figure's voice echoes in the basement as she tries to slow her breathing. The figure moves out of the shadow and drags the chair behind on the floor and looks straight at Estelle. She realizes it is Martin, the neighbor Laura's son. Martin pulls a knife out of his jacket pocket and speaks right at Estelle. "No one is going to ruin this situation for me, especially not an old nosy bitch like you." He gets up from the chair, kicking it behind him into the darkness, points the knife at Estelle, and makes one step, but before a second step, stares straight ahead in shock, looks up, and begins to have blood roll out of his mouth. His knife falls to the floor, followed by his body crumpling. Behind him, in the sparse darkness, Estelle can make out a small figure. The small figure looks down at Martin's body on the floor of the basement, raises its foot, and stomps down onto his head with a thick squish sound. As blood begins to pool under the destruction of Martin's previous skull and face, the figure raises their arms towards the heavens, and Martin's corpse, with lightning speed, slips into the blackness behind the figure. The figure comes out of the shadows towards Estelle, and Estelle gasps because the figure, even though hazy, looks like Mrs. Chance, the elderly woman who used to live in the house. In a distant, wispy tone, the apparition of Mrs. Chance explains, "Hello, Estelle. I'm so sorry you had to experience all of this, but it was a long time coming for that bastard. You were always the nicest to me when I was alive. Your wonderful spirit and energy was what I needed for the ability to establish enough strength and ability to physically attack Martin. You see, Martin was always an odd child, and always tried to hurt and abuse my grandchildren when they visited. His parents protected him and coddled him, all the way to the point that he began to kidnap and hold people hostage in their sub-basement as part of a cult he created in his mind." Estelle concludes, "Martin was a weak-minded shit and was influenced by other weak shits to abduct people for money and to torture them. The people of his cult can be tracked by the letters he has received that are in his bedroom next door in their home." The apparition of Mrs. Chance begins to disappear in the dark shadow of the basement as multiple footsteps can be heard on the floor above. The door to the basement opens fast and a light shines down the stairs. Estelle yells, "Help me! Please, help us all."
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming. Visitor by Lawrence Trokey, Part 1. Ananya was dreaming as the military helicopter she rode in flew over the picturesque Italian landscape. The massive Boeing Chinook glided over the lush foothills and tree line effortlessly like some mythical dragon. The sound of its twin 60-foot rotors in motion, one forward and one aft, as deafening as any heavy metal drummer on his best day. Yet the noise did not disturb Ananya. She fell asleep during the flight from the base in Innsbruck, Austria, not long after they took off. She was exhausted from stress and from constantly being on the move for almost 2 days, ushered from one checkpoint to the next by her escorts. As she slept, her dreams were a mixture of recent memories and content from her subconscious, fueled by her anxiety over her present situation. And her subconscious had a lot of material to work with. It replayed events surrounding when the mysterious government officials arrived at her luxurious home in Kensington, UK, in the middle of the night 2 days ago. She had been gently but persuasively made to get out of bed. She heard her mother choking back tears in the hallway outside of her room, pleading with the soldiers and the men in suits not to do this, whatever this was. Before she could really register what was going on, she was assisted in getting dressed by a female soldier, who also quickly packed a bag of clothes for her. Apparently, she was going on a trip. When they were just about finished, her mother pushed her way past one of the men in suits into the room. She grasped Ananya in a bear hug and started crying hard as she clung to her daughter. More people came into the room after her. One of them spoke to her mother, trying to calm her down, saying things like, "She will be in the best of care, Mrs. Taylor. It is imperative that you let us proceed. There is nothing to fear." While he said these things to her mother, another man approached her from the other side of the room and stuck her with a syringe. Ananya's mother spun her head towards the needle like she was going to defend herself, but instead, she immediately released her grip on Ananya. Her head fell forward, and another man stepped in to help catch her as she lost consciousness. They gently laid her on Ananya's bed, and then the man with the syringe checked her pulse. Ananya was now very frightened, and she started to cry. The sight of her mother disabled so quickly upset her greatly, and she screamed, "Did you kill her?" "No, dear." The man with the syringe looked up and smiled, kneeling next to Ananya's mother, lying on the bed unconscious. His voice was quiet and monotone like a librarian or a doctor. "No, your mother is fine. She is asleep. It is better for her this way. We don't want her to panic or possibly hurt herself. I will stay with her and make sure she is well cared for. You have my word on that, dear." This did little to calm Ananya. Her tear-streaked face scanned the faces of those in her room, looking for answers as to what this was all about. Then a new person entered the room, different from the rest. He was older, his hair was white, and he was smaller in stature than the other men and women, who stepped aside to let him approach Ananya. He looked less official than the others. His clothing was not like the uniforms or dark suits the rest wore. His was a bit more rumpled than the clean-cut, sharp-fitting suits and uniforms of the other people in her room. He looked more like one of the old men Ananya would sometimes see in the park playing chess or feeding the birds breadcrumbs. When he spoke, his voice reminded Ananya of someone's grandfather, or maybe even like the Father Christmas from the shopping center. Ananya, I am very sorry about all of this. We mean you and your mother no harm. I know this is terribly upsetting, but I assure you, it is for a very important reason we are here. Can we sit down while I explain it all to you? He gestured to the cushioned bench that was part of the window seat in her bedroom. The window was quite large and was framed with an arch trimmed in decorative molding. The cushioned bench was home to various stuffed animals, yet it was more than big enough for Ananya and this man to sit and talk. Ananya nodded her head and tentatively moved toward the window seat. She stole a glance at her mother sleeping in her bed as she sat down. You have many little friends here, I see. The man picked up a stuffed tiger and smiled down at it. He gently replaced it back where he found it and looked Ananya in the eye. We are your friends too, Ananya. I know this all seems very strange and scary right now, but it will make sense soon, and you will see that there is nothing to fear from anyone in this room. Ananya's gaze drifted to her mother again, and the man noticed this. Ananya, my name is Dr. Clark. I am a scientist, not a medical doctor. My specialty is biology. I am a member of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts. Have you heard of us? Ananya shook her head slightly, and he continued. Well, I guess I'm not surprised that a 14-year-old girl is not aware of something that sounds as dull as an Academy of Science. I like science, Ananya declared to correct his impression of her. Yes, you do. I've seen your grades from your school, and you're very sharp, I must say. I apologize if it seems I was patronizing you. Anyway, let's get to the heart of why I'm here, in your bedroom, in the middle of the night, shall we? Dr. Clark smiled again. He wasn't sure if he was winning Ananya over yet. I have been assigned to a very important mission. I would not be exaggerating to say it is the most important work I have ever done, or will ever do for that matter. It is so important, in fact, that myself and all that work with me, he gestured around the room at his companions, we must keep all the activities and information regarding it a secret. If news of my work were to be released to the general public, it could mean pandemonium, mass chaos, as it were. So the stakes are very high here, which is why we must operate in ways that are quiet and that do not attract attention to ourselves. It is for this reason we have come to your home in the middle of the night to meet you. What is it? What do you do? Ananya asked, more curious now than afraid. Yes, I'm coming to that. Dr. Clark continued as he took an opportunity to remove his glasses and clean the lenses with a handkerchief. For a long time now, the scientific community has been searching for evidence of life outside of our world. As a student of science, you may even be aware of the discovery of a number of planets scientists have identified as possibly being suited to host life. Other scientists have been monitoring radio frequencies for decades, trying to find evidence of intelligent life beyond our planet. The search for life in the universe has been a long and exhaustive one. And while our tools for searching the expanse of space are improving by leaps and bounds every year, we are still quite limited in what we can monitor here from Earth or in Earth's orbit. Ananya started to shift a little in her seat, becoming impatient with Dr. Clark and wanting to get to why they were here and why they wanted to meet her. Dr. Clark picked up on her impatience too and edited his explanation to accommodate Ananya. We are here tonight because we have, at last, been contacted by a being from another world. I know this sounds incredibly fantastic and unbelievable, but there it is. This entity has made itself known to us and has instructed us in regards to how we should establish communications with it. The process has been very long and is rather difficult to explain, the way we've been communicating with it thus far and so on. Still, we've made important strides over the last few months towards building a reliable method of communication with this being in a very short time. Is it here on Earth? Ananya's attention was now fully on Dr. Clark. Yes, after a fashion. It's hard to explain, but for now let's say that it is. And that brings us to why we are here with you. I know this may sound strange or even impossible to believe, but it is true. We are here because we need your help. Through our rudimentary communications with the alien being, we have discovered that you, Ananya, have been singled out and identified as possessing unique qualities. Let's call them gifts, shall we? You have unique gifts that we can utilize in this historic meeting of two worlds. Now, why the alien entity chose you out of all the human beings alive on the planet is a bit of a mystery to us. The exact nature of these gifts it claims you possess is also a bit unclear as well. However, the being has made clear to us that it has selected you, Ananya Taylor of Kensington, UK, to be the ambassador for the human race to its civilization. We need you to help us establish a relationship with this being and allow us to usher in the next phase of humanity's existence in the universe. You will be the bridge between our two worlds. Ananya gasped at this. She was shocked and not sure what to say next. She wasn't entirely sure she believed Dr. Clark's explanation, but if he was telling the truth, she had no idea what this meant for her or her family. What did they want her to do? What were these gifts Dr. Clark mentioned? How did this alien even know she existed, let alone know anything about her? She stared at Dr. Clark for what seemed like several minutes, too stunned to speak. Dr. Clark let Ananya process the information as best she could. Then one of the men in the room spoke. Doctor, our time is growing short here. We must move on. Dr. Clark looked up at the man and responded, Yes, of course. He turned back to Ananya. Ananya, I know this is a lot to try to make sense of, and it will take time. However, we can talk about this more as we travel to our next destination. Time is of the essence, and we must not keep our guest waiting. I can't, Ananya started, and then, I have to stay with my mother. My father will be home from a trip soon. Dr. Clark interrupted. We've spoken to your father, Ananya, and he is on his way back home now. We are actually transporting him as we speak, and he will be here within the hour to be with your mother. He was also told of our mission, and he understands the importance of your participation in this work. Lying was not a skill the doctor was very good at, but it seemed that he delivered it convincingly enough to Ananya. The female soldier stepped in and kneeled down next to Ananya. I have a bag of clothing and things all packed for you, dear, she said in a motherly tone. No need to worry. We have everything we need for the trip. Now, let's not keep the good doctor waiting. She touched Ananya's arm, indicating she was wanting her to stand up and start walking. Ananya suddenly darted to her mother's sleeping form and wrapped her arms around her. She started to cry again and buried her face in her mother's neck. The man with the syringe pulled another one from his coat pocket and moved around the bed towards Ananya. Dr. Clark stepped alongside him and held his arm for a brief second, as if to stop him. He started to say something else, but then he looked to the floor and said, Go ahead. Ananya didn't feel the needle enter her shoulder. She barely even realized she was suddenly slipping into darkness. To be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles podcast. So that completes episode 6, and now we're going to talk about the stories featured in this episode. First is Word Travels, and that's by Derek Leftridge. And so this one I was really excited about because you got the ghost story thing again, the traditional house is haunted kind of thing. But then you kind of threw me a curveball. As I'm listening to the beginning of this story, I'm hearing that, okay, yeah, we're talking about this house, and it's got this reputation and this all this stuff. And then there's robots and machinery that are part of it. I'm like, wait a minute, where's he going with this? And the delivery system of the mail and the food and the feeding and seating systems and all that. I'm like, wow, this is kind of crazy. But then when we get to the end of the story and how that kind of comes into play in terms of wrapping things up, I get it. But it's just like, wow, that's an interesting little sidebar that we kind of went down with all this stuff. What was the inspiration for that?
I wanted to do something. I mean, I always like horror, and sci-fi, and I like to kind of combine them together. And of course, we both like technology stuff, because of all the things we've already done and we're going to continue to do. But my thing was I wanted to kind of get something to where it was bringing people in with the horror kind of thing, the curiosity of that, and then branching it off into the technology part of it. And I wanted to build up the story of the woman because she's not able to get around. So, she's got help from her family about the technology part of it. And then when the older lady comes over because she's concerned, or a friend of hers, and she sees that the technology is still there, I probably, in my defense, should have explained a little bit more because I had a couple ideas cool about the kitchen with the old robots and everything, but I kind of jumped ahead. But then the technology kind of advanced to the point that it went downstairs, and then we realized that it's part of a cult type of thing.
Yeah.
And there's letters going down there, hence word travels. It's just the letters going through. And then I wanted to, I always like the idea of ghosts or spirits that are good that end up being the hero.
Yeah.
But I wanted mine to be a hero that was a badass and was able to just decimate somebody. And that's why I did what I did there.
That's right. I mean, I'm thinking of Gallagher, smashing pumpkins and watermelons and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so was I.
Apparently, he had that on the brain. I was trying to find the appropriate sound effects for that kind of thing. She takes him out, man.
Yeah.
Makes a mess of him.
It was good. Yeah, I really like doing that. I like to kind of take something that's kind of going a certain route, because I like being taken on those journeys too, going on a certain journey, going on a certain route, and then all of a sudden someone just whips the rug out from underneath me, and then I'm still enjoying it. That's the kind of thing I wanted to do with that one.
Yeah, no, great story. I love the ghost aspect of it, and the back and forth between the cult guy and the ghost and that kind of thing. Is really cool. So that one was Word Travels, and now we're talking about The Visitor Part 1.
Visitor Part 1, Lawrence did that one, and I really like this one. It's one I've invested in. I'm listening to the first part, and I'm really getting involved with these characters. First off, I do not like Dr. Clark. I don't really trust him, so that's my first part of it. I do like where we're going at with this at this point. It's really intriguing. This is obviously a sci-fi, and it's obviously an alien story, and it's going to be something to do with communication. Hopefully we get to the point that the doctor doesn't screw it up and get us to where there's a communication with the alien. Again, I just don't like this doctor. And why are there so many syringes needed? But anyway,
yes,
I do like all the details, and I think you did really well with that, and I really liked it. And what I don't want to say the premise. I don't understand the premise, but what do you feel about the first part of it that you liked doing?
Yeah. So this story started like 10 years ago. I sat down and started writing this story just, I guess, in a moment of boredom or whatever. The visual of the helicopter kind of flowing over the hills, flying over the hills, flowing over these rolling hills in Italy, going towards this mountain range. That was kind of where it started. And then this was before the movie Arrival, I think. And when that movie came out, I'm like, damn. I started this story,
Oops.
and there were some things that were similar to what they ended up presenting. But ultimately, my story will go in a different direction. Yeah, I just like this idea of this person just out of nowhere suddenly is pulled into the spotlight because they are the key to everything that's going to happen next. And it's this life-changing, world-changing event that this person is key to. And so, I started thinking through that and like, well, how do you start that off? And so these people arriving in the middle of the night in this teenager's room, and saying, look, we need you because we've got this thing that's out there that needs to talk to you, and they've said specifically they want you and no one else, and we can't continue on in this conversation that could lead to these life-changing things unless you cooperate. So what would they be motivated to do? And that's where all the syringes come in, to the point where, look, we're going to get your cooperation whether you really want to cooperate or not. So that's kind of the premise that sparked the idea to get me going on this. And then this is going to be a multi-part story, just heads up to the folks listening. So we'll kind of progress through these parts, and the story will unfold as it goes, of course, as it does. But in this first part, we find out that Ananya, the teenage Indian girl, is critical or key to starting this communication with this otherworldly being.
But we do have to say this, too. We also learned in this first part that Lawrence has learned a lot about aircrafts, and I think he might have been in the Air Force. But no, it was really good. I liked all the detail. I'm joking with you. But I loved all the detail. It kind of took me into those environments, which I love. I've always said it before. I think I've said it out here many times. Took me to those environments, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Again, I know it's kind of an intro type of section, but once we get into part 2, then things start really developing and bringing the story into fruition. So if you can hang out through this first part where it's a lot of beginning introductions and that kind of thing, you won't be disappointed, hopefully, in the second part.
Great job.
Thank you. Well, that's it for episode 6. We're going to wrap it up here and send you into the trailer for episode 7. Next time on The Shade Chronicles.
The boss and promoter, Slim Sammy Torito, taps him on the shoulder, and before Barney can turn around, Slim questions, "Why do you make me so sad? Someone with your size and ability makes everything difficult out there to the point that someone has to carry you through the whole show. Why is that, Barney? You better have a new character and direction all ready to go by next Tuesday, which is 3 days from now, or I will have to wave bye to you as you leave the promotion." Barney, a.k.a. Marshu Tentu, slips out of the ring and grabs his canopic jar, takes out the cork, and dramatically drips some of the red liquid into his hand. At the same time, his opponent, Road Rage Crasher, makes his way over to him, grabs his left shoulder, and Marshu Tentu throws the liquid into Road Rage's face. He quickly begins to act like the liquid is burning his eyes, as planned, but then smoke begins to come from Road Rage's eyes, and he begins to yell loudly. Waving wildly and clawing at his face, Road Rage begins to run to the backstage area up the entrance area.
Ananya, I want to be very clear now. Your parents have given us permission to have you assist us in the mission I spoke to you about in your room. I have explained the nature of the mission and tried to impart to you the importance of us working together. It is imperative that you cooperate to the best of your abilities for the rest of our time together. We cannot have any more dissent or hesitation in your willingness to help us. Is that understood? Dr. Clark delivered this speech without looking at Ananya. He flipped vigorously through the pages of the clipboard, hoping to discover an answer to his questions that he may have overlooked previously. He was about to go on with his rant when he noticed Ananya was awake. Instead, he addressed her. You nearly missed your first helicopter ride, Ananya. We have almost arrived at our destination. Oh, I guess I was pretty tired, she replied sheepishly. Her mind was rewinding back through everything she had heard the men discussing about her. So Dr. Clark lied about the gifts he claimed she possessed. The reason he told her they had come to get her in the first place. Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.